Tucson, Arizona, 1901. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets as Maria Lopez carefully arranged white lilies around the baptismal font. At 42, Maria had given birth to 6 daughters over the years, each one more beautiful than the last. Tonight was special. Her youngest, Isabella, would be baptized under the watchful eyes of Our Lady of Guadalupe at the old mission church on the edge of town. The Lopez family had prospered in Tucson, unusual for Mexican immigrants in those days. Eduardo Lopez, Maria's husband, had arrived 20 years prior with nothing but determination and a talent for leatherwork. Now his saddles were sought after by ranchers across the territory, bringing the family modest wealth and a fine adobe home on the respectable side of town. "The candles are ready, Mama," said Consuela, the eldest daughter at 19. Her voice carried a slight tremor that Maria pretended not to notice. "Gracias, mi hija." Maria's fingers trembled as she adjusted the baptismal gown, the same one all her daughters had worn. The delicate lace had yellowed slightly with age, but its beauty remained undiminished. Father Dominguez appeared at the vestry door, his weathered face solemn. "Is the family prepared?" he asked, his eyes darting nervously toward the darkening windows. Maria nodded, though a cold knot formed in her stomach. The 4 sisters present, Consuela, Lucia, Teresa, and Mariana, gathered closer together, their faces masks of forced calm. Eduardo stood stoically near the church entrance, watching the road outside. No one spoke of the 2 absent daughters. Sophia would have been 17 now, and Ramona 15. Both had been baptized in this very church as infants. Both had disappeared within 1 month of their baptisms, vanishing from their cribs without a trace. No forced entry, no witnesses, just empty cradles and grieving parents. After Ramona's disappearance, rumors spread through the Mexican community. Whispers of a curse, of a dark figure who claimed a child from the Lopez family as payment for their unusual prosperity. The American authorities had investigated half-heartedly, suggesting the children had been taken by coyotes or that Maria herself had done something unthinkable in a fit of madness. "We should begin," Father Dominguez said quietly, "before full darkness." Eduardo closed and barred the heavy church door, then nodded to the priest. Tonight would be different. Armed men, friends of Eduardo, were hidden around the church's perimeter. The older girls would take shifts watching the baby throughout the night. No one would leave the church until morning light. As the baptismal ceremony began, Maria cradled baby Isabella, inhaling the sweet scent of her downy head. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the mission's ancient timbers. Dust swirled against the stained glass windows, and the candles flickered, sending grotesque shadows dancing across the whitewashed walls. "In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti," intoned Father Dominguez, making the sign of the cross over Isabella's forehead. A sudden gust extinguished half the candles, plunging the church into semi-darkness. Consuela gasped, and Teresa began to weep silently. Maria clutched Isabella tighter, her eyes meeting Eduardo's across the baptismal font. His hand moved to the pistol concealed beneath his jacket. In the shadowed corners of the church, something seemed to shift and gather, like smoke coalescing into form. Maria felt eyes upon them, ancient, patient, hungry. "Dios mío," whispered Lucia, crossing herself. "He's here." A dome. As moonlight filtered through the colored glass of the church windows, the Lopez family huddled together in the central pew. Father Dominguez had retreated to the vestry after completing the baptism, muttering prayers under his breath. Outside, the wind had grown stronger, carrying with it the scent of desert sage and something else, something metallic and unpleasant. Baby Isabella slept peacefully in Maria's arms, oblivious to the tension surrounding her. Eduardo checked his pocket watch, just past 9 o'clock. The longest night of their lives stretched before them. "Mama," Consuela whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "There's something I need to tell you about Sophia and Ramona." Maria's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What do you know?" Consuela glanced nervously at her sisters, who leaned in closer. I saw him. The night Ramona disappeared. Eduardo moved closer, his face ashen. Why have you never spoken of this? Tears welled in Consuela's eyes. I was afraid. I thought you wouldn't believe me, or that he would come for me next if I spoke his name. Who? Eduardo demanded, his voice hoarse. Who did you see? Mr. Blackwood. The name fell from Consuela's lips like a stone dropping into still water. Maria crossed herself instinctively. Sebastian Blackwood was a wealthy American businessman who had arrived in Tucson around the same time as Eduardo's sudden success. He owned several silver mines in the territory and a grand house on the hill overlooking the town. Few people in Tucson had ever spoken directly with him. He kept to himself and conducted business through intermediaries. What did you see? Maria pressed, clutching Isabella tighter. Consuela's voice trembled. I woke up in the night and went to check on Ramona. The window was open, though I know Papa had closed and locked it, and there was Mr. Blackwood standing over her crib. She swallowed hard. His eyes, Mama, they weren't right. They reflected the moonlight like an animal's. Did he take her? Eduardo asked, his hand again moving to his concealed weapon. I don't know. I was so frightened I hid in the shadow of the doorway. When I finally found my courage and looked again, both Ramona and Mr. Blackwood were gone. Teresa clutched Mariana's hand. But why would he take our sisters? What would he want with babies? Consuela looked down at her hands. There's more. 2 days before Sophia disappeared, Papa came home with money. More than we'd ever seen. Remember, Mama? The day you bought the silver candlesticks for the church? Maria's face drained of color as the memory surfaced. Eduardo had indeed come home with an unexpected windfall, claiming a wealthy rancher had placed a large order for custom saddles. They had celebrated that night, planning improvements to their home, new dresses for the girls, donations to the church. Eduardo's face hardened. Are you suggesting I sold our daughters, Consuela, for money? No, Papa, never. Consuela's eyes filled with tears. But I heard Mr. Blackwood talking to you once, in your workshop. He said something about our arrangement, and how prosperity always requires sacrifice. A heavy silence fell over the family. Outside, one of Eduardo's friends called a nervous all-clear as he patrolled the church grounds. There was an arrangement, Eduardo finally admitted, his voice hollow, but not what you think. Blackwood offered to introduce my work to wealthy Americans, to help me establish my business. He asked for nothing in return, at least nothing stated. A deal with the devil, Maria whispered, and now he collects his payment. As if summoned by her words, the church door rattled violently against its bar. The candles flickered wildly, and baby Isabella woke with a startled cry. He's trying to get in, Mariana whimpered. Eduardo stood, drawing his pistol. Stay together. I'll check the doors and windows. As he moved toward the entrance, a cold draft swept through the church, extinguishing every candle simultaneously. In the sudden darkness, Maria heard something that turned her blood to ice, the soft creak of the vestry door opening, followed by Father Dominguez's muffled cry of terror. Then silence. In the pitch darkness, Maria clutched Isabella to her chest, trying to quiet the infant's frightened cries. "Eduardo!" she called, her voice quavering. No response came from the direction of the church entrance. The silence was absolute, save for the rapid breathing of her daughters, huddled around her, and the distant howl of the wind. "Strike a match," Maria whispered to Consuela. "Quickly." Consuela fumbled in her pocket for the small box of matches she always carried. Her trembling fingers nearly dropped it twice before she managed to strike one. The tiny flame illuminated their terrified faces in a small circle of wavering light. "Where's Papa?" Teresa whispered, clutching Maria's sleeve. Before anyone could answer, a strange sound echoed through the darkened church. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails drumming on wood. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The vestry," Lucia whispered. "Something happened to Father Dominguez." The match burned down to Consuela's fingers, and she dropped it with a gasp, plunging them back into darkness. Maria made a swift decision. "We need more light. Consuela, Teresa, light all the candles you can find. Lucia, Mariana, find your father and stay together. I'll check on Father Dominguez." "No, Mama," Consuela protested. "We should stay together." "We cannot sit in darkness, waiting to be taken one by one," Maria replied firmly. "Take Isabella." She placed the whimpering baby in Consuela's arms. "Do not let her go, not for a moment." As Consuela struck another match, Maria took a candle and lit it. The small flame barely penetrated the oppressive darkness, but it was enough for her to find her way toward the vestry door. Behind her, she could hear her daughters moving cautiously around the church, lighting candles and calling softly for their father. The tapping sound continued, growing faster and more insistent as Maria approached the vestry. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door handle. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open. The vestry was empty. Father Dominguez was nowhere to be seen, though his prayer book lay open on the small desk. The window stood ajar, curtains billowing in the night breeze. Maria moved closer, raising her candle to peer outside. The churchyard was still, the moonlight casting long shadows across the graves. One of Eduardo's friends, she recognized Pablo Mendez by his distinctive hat, stood vigilant near the gate, rifle in hand. He seemed unaware of any disturbance inside the church. A floorboard creaked behind her. Maria spun around, her heart pounding. "Eduardo?" she whispered hopefully. A tall figure stood in the vestry doorway, silhouetted against the faint candlelight from the church beyond. For one hopeful moment, Maria thought it was her husband. Then the figure stepped forward into the circle of her candlelight. Sebastian Blackwood was impeccably dressed in a black suit, his silver watch chain gleaming in the candlelight. His face, handsome by American standards, wore an expression of polite interest, as if he'd encountered Maria at a social gathering rather than in a darkened church past midnight. "Mrs. Lopez," he said, his voice cultured and soft. "What a pleasure to finally make your acquaintance properly." Maria backed away until she felt the cold stone wall behind her. "Where is my husband? Where is Father Dominguez?" Blackwood smiled. His teeth looked too white, too sharp in the candlelight. "They're merely indisposed. This conversation is long overdue, and I preferred it to be private." "What have you done with my daughters?" Maria demanded, finding courage in her maternal rage. "Sophia and Ramona, where are they?" "They're well cared for," Blackwood replied, examining his immaculate fingernails. "Growing into lovely young women, just as these four will be." He gestured toward the church, where Maria's daughters were still calling for their father. "And the little one, of course. Isabella, isn't it? A beautiful name." "You cannot have her," Maria hissed. "Not her, not any of them." "Whatever deal my husband made with you," Blackwood laughed, the sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. "My dear Mrs. Lopez, your husband made no explicit deal with me. He merely accepted my help. And in this world, nothing comes without a price." "What are you?" Maria whispered, clutching her crucifix. Blackwood's eyes caught the candlelight strangely, reflecting it back like a cat's. "I am a collector, Mrs. Lopez, of beautiful, special things." He stepped closer. "Your family has unusual blood, old blood. I sensed it the moment I met Eduardo. So much potential, especially in the female line." From the church came a sudden scream, Consuela's voice high with terror. Maria lunged for the door, but Blackwood moved with inhuman speed, blocking her path. "It's already begun," he said softly. "You cannot stop what was set in motion years ago." Consuela's scream galvanized Maria into action. With a strength born of desperation, she thrust the candle toward Blackwood's face. He recoiled instinctively, giving her just enough space to dart past him and back into the church. The scene that greeted her froze the blood in her veins. Candles now illuminated most of the church interior, revealing Eduardo slumped unconscious near the main entrance. Mariana knelt beside him, trying to revive him. Lucia stood protectively in front of them, a heavy silver candlestick raised like a weapon. But it was the sight at the baptismal font that stopped Maria's heart. Consuela stood rigid. Baby Isabella clutched to her chest as a woman in a flowing white dress circled her slowly. The woman's back was to Maria, but her long dark hair and graceful movements seemed eerily familiar. Sophia? The name escaped Maria's lips in a disbelieving whisper. The woman turned, and Maria staggered back in shock. It was indeed Sophia, her Sophia, but changed. At 17, she would have been beautiful, but this creature was unnaturally so, her skin too perfect, her eyes too bright. She smiled at Maria, revealing teeth as sharp as Blackwood's. "Mamma," Sophia said, her voice musical yet wrong somehow, like a skilled forgery of her daughter's voice. "How lovely to see you again. Won't you introduce me to my new sister?" Consuela clutched Isabella tighter, backing away. Teresa had disappeared from sight. "You're not my daughter," Maria said, her voice breaking. "What has he done to you?" Sophia laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "He made me better, Mama. Stronger. Immortal." She turned back to Consuela. "Give me the baby, sister. It's tradition now. A Lopez daughter for Mr. Blackwood's collection." "Never," Consuela spat, continuing to back away. Maria felt Blackwood's presence behind her before she heard his voice. "Family reunions can be so emotional," he observed dryly. "Sophia, my dear, do try to be more persuasive. We don't want a repetition of the unpleasantness with Ramona." "Ramona?" Maria turned to face him. "What happened to Ramona?" The shadow passed over Blackwood's perfect features. "Some bloodlines prove incompatible with the transformation. Ramona, unfortunately, rejected the gift." His expression hardened. "She's been disposed of." Rage, pure and molten, surged through Maria's body. "Murderer!" she screamed, lunging at him. Her fingers curved into claws aimed at his eyes. Blackwood caught her wrists effortlessly, his grip like iron. "Careful, Mrs. Lopez. You still have 4 daughters left. How many are you willing to sacrifice tonight?" A sudden crash from the church entrance drew everyone's attention. Eduardo had regained consciousness and thrown one of the heavy wooden pews against the door, barricading it. "No one leaves," he growled, blood streaming from a wound on his temple. "Not until dawn." Sophia hissed, the sound inhuman. "Dawn is hours away, Papa, and there are more of us than you realize." As if on cue, shapes emerged from the shadows of the church. Pale figures in fine clothes, moving with the same unnatural grace as Sophia and Blackwood. Men and women of different ages and appearances, but all with the same hungry look in their reflective eyes. "My previous collections," Blackwood explained conversationally, still holding Maria immobile. "From various worthy families across the territories. The Parkers from Texas, the Wilds from Colorado, the Salinases from California, all exceptional bloodlines." Maria's eyes darted frantically around the church, counting her children. Consuela still held Isabella, backed against the altar now. Lucia stood with the silver candlestick, Eduardo at her side. Mariana had crawled beneath a pew, trying to make herself invisible, but where was Teresa? A sudden shout from the vestry answered her question. "Mama! Papa! Help me!" Teresa's voice high with terror. Maria yanked against Blackwood's grip, but couldn't break free. Eduardo started toward the vestry, but Sophia moved to block his path, inhumanly fast. "Another daughter for your collection, Mr. Blackwood?" Sophia asked sweetly. Blackwood frowned. "Not quite according to plan, but adaptable. Bring her, Sophia." Before Sophia could move toward the vestry, a new sound cut through the tense atmosphere. The church bell, ringing frantically above them. Someone was pulling the bell rope in the tower, sounding an alarm that would wake the entire town. Blackwood's composure cracked for the first time. "Stop that immediately!" he shouted, releasing Maria to stride toward the bell tower entrance. From the vestry, Teresa emerged, her face tear-streaked but determined. "I locked them in," she announced, holding up an old iron key. "The men from outside. They're coming up the back stairs." Outside, shouts could be heard as the town awakened to the alarm. The pale figures in the church began to shift nervously, looking to Blackwood for direction. Maria seized her chance. Grabbing the silver crucifix from the altar, she thrust it toward Sophia. "Leave my family," she commanded. "In God's name, begone!" Sophia didn't burst into flames or dissolve into dust as Maria had half expected. Instead, she laughed, but there was a note of uncertainty in it now. "Superstition, Mama? I thought better of you." But Sophia did step back, creating enough space for Eduardo to rush to Consuela's side, shielding both her and baby Isabella. The bell continued to ring, and now torches could be seen through the windows as townspeople approached the church. Blackwood's followers began to melt back into the shadows, abandoning their master. "This isn't over," Blackwood said, his voice cold with fury. "The child is marked. She belongs to me. She belongs to God and to her family," Maria retorted, standing her ground. "Leave this place. Dawn approaches." As if to emphasize her words, the faintest lightning of the sky became visible through the eastern windows. Blackwood's face contorted with rage and something else, fear. "Sophia," he commanded, "come." Adieu. For a moment, Sophia hesitated, looking at her family with an expression almost like longing. Then her face hardened, becoming a beautiful mask once more. "Until next time, Mama," she said, before following Blackwood into the shadows. The first rays of morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the church floor in jewel-toned patterns. Outside, the clamor of voices had grown as townspeople gathered, responding to the alarm bell that had finally fallen silent. Maria sat in the front pew, cradling Isabella, who had miraculously slept through much of the night's terror. Eduardo stood guard at the barricaded main door, refusing to open it, despite the increasingly insistent knocking. Father Dominguez had been found unconscious in the bell tower, with no memory of how he had gotten there. "Should we let them in, Papa?" Lucia asked, glancing nervously at the door. Eduardo shook his head. "Not yet. We don't know who to trust." Consuela, who had been examining the church windows, turned to her parents with a grim expression. "They're gone. Blackwood and his people. But look." She pointed to the baptismal font. Maria approached cautiously, still holding Isabella. Inside the font, where holy water had stood the night before, was only a dark, viscous liquid that looked horribly like blood. "Dios mío," Maria whispered, turning away. Teresa, pale but composed, placed a comforting hand on her mother's shoulder. "We survived, Mama. All of us." Her voice dropped lower. "Except Sophia and Ramona." "Sophia is not dead," Maria replied, her voice hollow, "but she is not our Sophia anymore. And Ramona—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the thought. The pounding on the church door grew louder. "Lopez, open up!" The voice belonged to Sheriff Davis, the American lawman who had so half-heartedly investigated the disappearances of Sophia and Ramona years earlier. Eduardo exchanged glances with Maria, who nodded slightly. With help from Lucia, he removed the heavy pew barricading the door and opened it just wide enough to look out. Sheriff Davis stood on the church steps, flanked by several deputies and curious townspeople. His weathered face showed irritation rather than concern. "What in tarnation is going on here, Lopez? Waking the whole town in the middle of the night with that bell?" "We were attacked," Eduardo stated firmly, "during my daughter's baptism." The sheriff's expression remained skeptical. "Attacked? By whom?" "Sebastian Blackwood." A murmur ran through the crowd at the name. Blackwood was known to everyone in Tucson, though few had met him personally. "That's a serious accusation against a prominent citizen," Sheriff Davis said, his hand moving to rest on his holstered gun. "Any proof of this attack?" Eduardo glanced back at his family, huddled together near the altar. How could they prove what had happened? The blood in the font would be dismissed as a prank or hysteria. The testimonies of a Mexican family would hold little weight against a wealthy American businessman. "He took our daughters," Maria said, stepping forward with Isabella in her arms, "Sophia and Ramona, years ago, and he returned for Isabella last night." Sheriff Davis's expression softened slightly at the sight of the baby. "Mrs. Lopez, I understand you've suffered losses, but we investigated those disappearances thoroughly. There was no evidence of kidnapping." "Because you didn't want to find any," Teresa said boldly. "Because Blackwood owns half the mines in the territory and half the men in your office." The sheriff's face darkened. "Watch your tongue, girl." From the back of the crowd, a man pushed forward, Pablo Mendez, one of Eduardo's friends, who had stood watch outside the church. His hat was missing, and there was a bruise darkening on his jaw. "It's true, Sheriff. Something happened here last night. Me and the others, we were keeping watch outside when we heard screams from inside the church. But when we tried to enter, someone attacked us from behind, knocked us out cold." Sheriff Davis frowned. "Who attacked you?" Pablo shook his head. "Never saw them. Moved too fast." The sheriff sighed heavily, clearly struggling between his desire to dismiss the whole affair and the growing number of witnesses. "Look, I'll send a deputy up to Blackwood's house to ask some questions. In the meantime—" "No!" Maria's voice rang out, startling everyone, including Isabella, who began to cry. "Do not send one man alone to that house. He will never return." An uncomfortable silence fell over the crowd. Superstitious nonsense from a hysterical Mexican woman. Maria could read the thought in their expressions, but she also saw uncertainty and fear. Blackwood had always been an object of curiosity and whispered speculation in Tucson. Now those whispers would grow louder. "Mrs. Lopez," Sheriff Davis began, his tone placating. "My daughter is alive," Maria interrupted, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Sophia. She was here last night, changed, working with Blackwood. She tried to take Isabella." "That's enough," Eduardo said quietly, putting an arm around his wife. To the sheriff he added, "We will make a formal statement at your office later today. For now, we need rest." Sheriff Davis nodded, seeming relieved at the reprieve. "Fine. Come by this afternoon." He turned to disperse the crowd, many of whom lingered, whispering among themselves. Inside the church, the Lopez family gathered their belongings in silence. The terror of the night had passed, but none of them felt safe. "What will we do?" Consuela asked quietly as she helped Teresa clean the baptismal font, both of them avoiding direct contact with the dark liquid. "Blackwood will come again." Maria looked down at Isabella, now sleeping peacefully again. "We will fight," she said simply, "and we will find Sophia." "And if she doesn't want to be found?" Lucia asked. "She seemed different, Mama, changed in more ways than just her appearance." Maria closed her eyes briefly, remembering the coldness in her eldest daughter's eyes, so unlike the warm, loving girl she had raised. "Then we will save her," she said firmly. "Whatever Blackwood has done to her, we will undo it." Eduardo, who had been speaking quietly with Father Dominguez, rejoined his family. "The father has agreed to bless the house," he said. "Every window, every door." "Will it be enough?" Mariana asked, voicing the fear they all felt. "It must be," Eduardo replied, "and we will take other precautions. Silver, crosses. Garlic, if the old tales hold any truth." Teresa looked up sharply. "You think Blackwood is—" "What? A vampire? Those are just stories, Papa." Eduardo's expression was grim. "After what we saw last night, are you so certain what is real and what is merely story?" None of them had an answer to that. As they prepared to leave the church, Maria paused at the font, now clean of the mysterious dark liquid. "Isabella will need to be baptized again," she said quietly to Father Dominguez. "In clean water, blessed by God." The old priest nodded, his face grave. "I will perform the sacrament again, Señora Lopez, but—" He hesitated. "Perhaps it would be wise to do so elsewhere. In Nogales or Phoenix. "You think we are not safe in Tucson?" Eduardo asked. Father Dominguez looked around the church, his gaze lingering on the shadows in the corners, still deep despite the morning light. "I think that what occurred here last night was evil, Señor Lopez, true evil, and it has marked this place." "It has marked our family," Maria corrected softly, "and we cannot run from it forever." Sheriff William Davis tugged uncomfortably at his collar as his horse carried him up the winding path to Blackwood Manor. Despite the midday sun beating down on him, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The Lopez family's wild accusations echoed in his mind, along with the memory of the fear in their eyes, fear that had seemed genuine despite the fantastical nature of their claims. The manor loomed ahead, an imposing structure of stone and dark wood that seemed out of place in the Arizona landscape. Unlike the traditional haciendas or practical wooden structures that dominated Tucson architecture, Blackwood's residence looked as if it had been transplanted from some gloomy European countryside. As Davis approached the iron gates, he was surprised to find them standing open. More surprising still was the absence of any servants or guards. Blackwood was known to employ a small army of private security, former soldiers and gunmen, who kept curious townsfolk at a distance. Davis dismounted, tying his horse to a hitching post near the entrance. "Hello?" he called out, his voice sounding thin in the oppressive silence. No birds sang in the trees surrounding the manor, he realized. No insects buzzed. The whole place felt unnaturally still. Drawing his revolver, more for comfort than from any immediate sense of danger, Davis climbed the steps to the front door. It swung open at his touch, revealing a dimly lit entrance hall. Heavy curtains had been drawn across all the windows, allowing only thin slivers of sunlight to penetrate the gloom. "Mr. Blackwood," Davis called, taking a tentative step inside. "Sebastian Blackwood, this is Sheriff Davis. I need to ask you some questions." His voice echoed through the hall, receiving no response. Davis moved further inside, his boots loud on the marble floor. The interior was opulent, filled with expensive furniture, artwork, and curiosities from around the world. But there was a layer of dust on many surfaces, as if the cleaning staff had been absent for some time. A large portrait dominated the far wall, Blackwood himself looking exactly as he did now, though the painting style and Blackwood's attire suggested it was at least 50 years old. Davis frowned, moving closer to examine it. The subject's eyes seemed to follow him, a common artistic trick, but unsettling nonetheless. Sheriff Davis. What an unexpected pleasure. Davis spun around, nearly dropping his gun in surprise. Sebastian Blackwood stood at the entrance to what appeared to be a library, impeccably dressed as always, in a tailored black suit. His pale face betrayed no emotion, though his eyes, unusually bright in the dim light, studied Davis with intensity. "Mr. Blackwood," Davis managed, holstering his weapon with a self-conscious cough. "I apologize for the intrusion." There was no answer to my knock. Blackwood smiled thinly. "I find myself temporarily without staff, a situation I'm remedying shortly. What brings Tucson's esteemed sheriff to my humble abode?" There was nothing humble about the manor, but Davis let the false modesty pass. "I'm investigating a disturbance at the mission church last night. The Lopez family has made some accusations against you." "Indeed?" Blackwood raised an eyebrow, gesturing for Davis to follow him into the library. "What sort of accusations?" The library was even darker than the entrance hall, illuminated only by a small fire in the grate, despite the heat of the day. Blackwood took a seat in a high-backed leather chair, motioning for Davis to do the same. "They claim you attacked them during a baptism ceremony," Davis said, remaining standing, "that you've taken 2 of their daughters in the past and returned for a third last night." Blackwood laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the book-lined room. "How colorful! The Mexican imagination is so vibrant, don't you find? I was here all last night, Sheriff, as my guest can attest." He gestured to a shadowed corner of the room that Davis hadn't noticed was occupied. A figure stepped forward, a young woman in an elegant dress, her dark hair arranged in an elaborate style. With a shock, Davis recognized Sophia Lopez, the eldest missing daughter. "Miss Lopez," he exclaimed, "your family believes you were kidnapped years ago." Sophia smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "A misunderstanding, Sheriff. I left home of my own accord. Mr. Blackwood has been kind enough to take me in as his ward and provide me with an education far beyond what my parents could offer." Davis frowned, studying the girl. She was beautiful, poised, and articulate, nothing like the frightened child the Lopez family had described losing. Yet something about her demeanor disturbed him. There was a coldness to her, an unnatural stillness. And the other girl, Ramona? A shadow passed over Sophia's perfect features. "My sister chose a different path. She left some time ago. California, I believe." Blackwood stood smoothly. "As you can see, Sheriff, the Lopez family's accusations are groundless. Sophia's here of her own free will, and I was nowhere near the church last night." Davis wasn't so easily convinced. "Then how do you explain what happened at the church? Multiple witnesses describe a disturbance, and Eduardo Lopez's friends were attacked while standing guard outside." "Tucson has its share of unsavory characters," Blackwood replied dismissively. "Perhaps someone with a grudge against the Lopez family took the opportunity to frighten them. Or perhaps," he paused, his eyes gleaming in the firelight, "perhaps Maria Lopez, who has lost 2 daughters, feared losing another and succumbed to hysteria." "That doesn't explain the men who were attacked outside," Davis persisted. Blackwood shrugged elegantly. "I can't account for every act of violence in your jurisdiction, Sheriff. That's your responsibility, is it not?" Davis felt his irritation rising. Blackwood's smug condescension grated on him, as did the man's obvious influence over Sophia Lopez. Yet what crime could he actually charge Blackwood with? Sophia was clearly over 16 and claiming to be here voluntarily. The events at the church were confused and lacked physical evidence. "I'd like to speak with Miss Lopez alone," Davis said finally. Blackwood's smile didn't waver, but something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Sophia is still recovering from a recent illness and shouldn't be overtaxed." As if on cue, Sophia swayed slightly, putting a hand to her forehead. "Perhaps another time, Sheriff," she said, her voice suddenly weaker. "I'm not feeling quite myself today." Davis hesitated, torn between his duty to investigate and his growing unease. Every instinct told him something was wrong here, but he had no legal grounds to press further. "Very well," he conceded reluctantly, "but this matter isn't closed, Mr. Blackwood. I'll be watching your movements in town carefully." Blackwood's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too white, too sharp. "By all means, Sheriff. Watch as carefully as you like. My life is an open book." The phrase sent another chill down Davis's spine. He nodded curtly and turned to leave, feeling Sophia's and Blackwood's eyes on his back as he walked out of the library. The journey back through the silent house seemed longer, somehow. Davis couldn't shake the feeling that he was being observed from every darkened doorway, every shadowed corner. When he finally emerged into the sunlight, he took a deep breath, only then realizing how stale and cold the air inside the manor had been. As he mounted his horse, Davis glanced back at the imposing structure. In an upstairs window, he caught a glimpse of a pale face watching him, not Blackwood or Sophia, but someone else, a young woman with haunted eyes. She raised her hand as if in warning or supplication, then vanished as a curtain fell back into place. Sheriff Davis rode back to town with more questions than answers, and an unsettling certainty that Sebastian Blackwood was far more dangerous than he had previously believed. The Lopez home hummed with activity as Eduardo directed the placement of protective measures. Silver crosses now hung over every doorway. Garlic bulbs were strung along window frames. Salt lines were poured across thresholds. The family had drawn from every folk tradition they knew, creating a patchwork of protections that reflected their desperate situation. "The windows are secured, Papa," Lucia reported, returning from her task with Teresa. "Iron nails in the frames, just as Father Dominguez suggested." Eduardo nodded, his face grim. Since their return from the church, he had barely spoken, consumed by guilt and determination in equal measure. Maria watched him from the kitchen doorway, recognizing the self-recrimination in his every movement. "It wasn't your fault," she said softly when the girls had moved on to their next tasks. "You couldn't have known what Blackwood was, what he wanted." Eduardo's hands stilled on the silver bullets he was carefully loading into his revolver. "I invited him into our lives, Maria. I accepted his help. I was proud, eager for success." His voice broke. "I sold our daughter's futures for a better workshop and American customers." Maria moved to his side, placing her hand over his. "You wanted to provide for your family. There is no sin in that." "The sin was in my pride," Eduardo insisted, "in believing I deserved more than other men who worked just as hard, in thinking there could be such easy prosperity without cost." Before Maria could respond, Consuela entered the kitchen, baby Isabella fussing in her arms. "She won't settle, Mama," Consuela said, worry creasing her young face. "And look." She tilted the baby toward Maria, revealing a small, crescent-shaped mark on Isabella's delicate neck, like a bruise, but too precise, too deliberate. "When did this appear?" Maria asked, taking Isabella and examining the mark more closely. "I just noticed it while changing her," Consuela replied. "It wasn't there this morning." Eduardo stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He marked her, just as he said he would. Maria clutched Isabella tighter. "What does it mean?" "It means our precautions may not be enough," Eduardo said grimly. "We need to speak with someone who understands what we're facing." "Father Dominguez," Maria began. Eduardo shook his head. "The father is a good man, but his knowledge is limited to what the church teaches. We need someone with a different expertise." Consuela looked between her parents uncertainly. "Who?" "Doña Elvira," Eduardo said decisively. "She lives on the edge of the barrio. People say she knows the old ways from before the missionaries came." Maria frowned. "The curandera?" "Eduardo, the church forbids." "The church did not save our daughters last night," Eduardo interrupted harshly. "The church did not recognize the evil that took Sofia and killed Ramona. We need knowledge the priests don't have." The desperation in his voice silenced Maria's objections. He was right. They were facing something beyond their understanding, something that their faith alone had not been able to defeat. "I'll go to her," Maria decided. "A mother asking for help for her child. She's more likely to speak openly with me." Eduardo nodded reluctantly. "Take Mariana with you. I'll stay here with the other girls and continue the preparations." As Maria prepared to leave, wrapping Isabella carefully in a blanket that had been blessed by Father Dominguez, Consuela approached her father. "Sheriff Davis rode up to Blackwood's house earlier," she said quietly. "Pablo Mendez saw him on the road." Eduardo's expression darkened. "The sheriff won't find anything. Blackwood is too clever, too powerful." "What if Sofia tells him the truth?" Consuela persisted. "Sofia," Eduardo's voice faltered. "What we saw last night wasn't our Sofia anymore, mija. Whatever Blackwood has done to her, she serves him now." Tears welled in Consuela's eyes. "We can save her, can't we, Papa? Bring her back to us." Eduardo pulled his eldest daughter into a fierce embrace. "We will try," he promised. "With everything we have, we will try." As Maria and Mariana set out for Doña Elvira's humble adobe dwelling on the outskirts of town, the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. They walked quickly, eyes darting at every shadow, every movement. Tucson seemed changed somehow, threatening where it had once been merely indifferent to their presence. Doña Elvira's home was marked by bundles of dried herbs hanging from the roof beams and strange symbols painted around the doorway. An old woman sat outside, her dark eyes sharp in her deeply wrinkled face. She watched Maria and Mariana approach, showing no surprise at their arrival. "I've been expecting you, Maria Lopez," she said in Spanish, her voice like dry leaves. "The town speaks of nothing but your night at the church." Maria clutched Isabella closer. "Then you know why I've come." Doña Elvira nodded slowly. "The pale one on the hill, the one who takes children." She gestured for them to follow her inside. "Come. The sun sets soon, and night is his time." The interior of the small house was thick with the scent of herbs and incense. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with jars, bundles, stones, and objects Maria couldn't identify. Mariana pressed close to her mother, eyes wide. "Show me the child," Doña Elvira commanded, lighting oil lamps as the room darkened. Maria unwrapped Isabella, revealing the crescent mark on her neck. Doña Elvira sucked in a sharp breath. "La marca del coleccionista," she whispered. "The collector's mark. What does it mean?" Maria asked, fear tightening her throat. The old woman's face was grave. "It means he has claimed her, created a connection that allows him to find her, to draw her to him when she is older. How do we remove it? You cannot." Doña Elvira's bluntness was like a physical blow. "The mark is bound to her life force. To remove it would kill her." Maria's legs weakened, and she sank onto a wooden stool. "Then we've lost her already." "I did not say that." Doña Elvira began moving about the room, collecting items from her shelves. "The mark creates a connection, yes, but connections flow both ways. What can be used to track can be used to trap." Hope flickered in Maria's heart. "You know how to fight this creature? To destroy him?" Doña Elvira paused, fixing Maria with a penetrating stare. "Destroy? Perhaps not. Such beings are difficult to kill permanently, but weaken, bind, trap, yes, these things are possible." "What is he?" Mariana asked, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived. "A vampire, like in the stories?" "Names have power, child," Doña Elvira replied cryptically. "Call him vampire, brujo, demonio. It matters less than what he does, how he operates." She returned to her work, grinding herbs in a stone mortar. "He feeds on life force, on blood, yes. He cannot walk in sunlight. Silver burns him, but he is not mindless, not merely a monster from tales to frighten children. He is ancient, cunning, patient." "He took my daughter Sophia," Maria said, her voice catching. "Changed her somehow." Doña Elvira nodded grimly. "The transformation. He selects carefully, those with special bloodlines, with potential he can shape. Not all survive the process." "Ramona," Maria whispered, tears filling her eyes. "If she died during the transformation, consider it mercy," Doña Elvira said, her voice gentler now. "Those who survive become like him, bound to his will, sharing his hunger, his weaknesses." "Can Sophia be saved?" Maria asked, the question she most feared to have answered. The old woman was silent for a long moment. "Perhaps," she finally said, "if the transformation is recent, if some spark of her true self remains, but it would be dangerous. For her and for you." Maria straightened her shoulders. "Tell me what to do." Doña Elvira began filling small pouches with her herbal mixtures. "First, protect yourselves. Protect the child. These will strengthen your home's defenses." She handed the pouches to Mariana. "Place them above doors, windows, in the four corners of each room." To Maria, she gave a small vial of dark liquid. "Anoint the child's mark with this each sunset. It will not remove the connection, but it will confuse it, make it more difficult for him to locate her." "And Blackwood himself?" Maria asked. "How do we fight him?" Doña Elvira's expression became grave. "To confront him directly would be suicide. He has existed for centuries, gaining strength with each life he takes, each transformation he completes. You must be more cunning." She moved to a wooden chest in the corner of the room, unlocking it with a key she wore around her neck. From within, she withdrew a small silver box, intricately engraved with symbols. "This contains soil from his homeland," she explained. "A powerful binding agent, if used correctly. On the night of the new moon, when his powers are at their weakest, you must lure him to consecrated ground, the church, and use this to bind him." "Lure him how?" Maria asked. dread pooling in her stomach at the obvious answer. With what he wants most, Doña Elvira confirmed. The child, and the one he has already marked for his collection, Sofia. The week following the baptism passed in tense vigilance for the Lopez family. Each night, they huddled together in the main room of their home, surrounded by protective talismans and weapons. Eduardo took turns keeping watch with Consuela and Lucia, while Maria tended to baby Isabella, whose fussiness had increased since the appearance of the mark on her neck. Sheriff Davis had returned from Blackwood Manor with troubling news. Sophia was indeed there, claiming to be a willing ward of Blackwood rather than a captive. His description of her coldness, her unnatural poise, had only confirmed the family's fears about what she had become. The sheriff believes she's there by choice, Eduardo told Maria as they prepared for another night of watchfulness. He says his hands are tied legally. Maria's jaw tightened as she applied Doña Elvira's ointment to Isabella's mark. The law cannot help us against what Blackwood truly is. The new moon was still 3 days away. 3 more nights of vulnerability before they could attempt to trap Blackwood as Doña Elvira had instructed. Each sunset brought renewed fear, each sunrise tentative relief. Teresa, who had been watching at the window, suddenly tensed. "Someone's coming," she whispered. Eduardo grabbed his silver-loaded revolver. "Who?" "A woman," Teresa replied, squinting through the gathering dusk. "She's alone. It's... Mama, it's Sophia." Maria nearly dropped Isabella in shock. "Sophia! Here!" They rushed to the window. Sure enough, a slender figure in an elegant dress was walking up the path to their home, moving with unnatural grace, even on the uneven ground. Sophia's face was pale in the fading light, her expression unreadable. It could be a trick, Eduardo warned, positioning himself between his family and the door. Blackwood could be using her to gain entry. "Or she could be coming home," Maria said, hope warring with caution in her voice. "Coming back to us." A soft knock sounded at the door. No one moved. "Mama? Papa?" Sophia's voice, so achingly familiar despite its new musical quality, drifted through the wooden door. "Please, let me in. I need to speak with you." Eduardo and Maria exchanged glances, years of shared life, allowing them to communicate wordlessly. Eduardo nodded slightly, raising his revolver. "Stand back from the door, Sophia," he called. "I'm opening it, but you must remain outside." There was a moment of silence, then, "I understand, Papa." Eduardo cautiously opened the door, keeping his body in the protected space of the threshold. Sophia stood several feet back, her hands clasped before her. In the dim light of dusk, she looked almost normal. Their beautiful eldest daughter returned to them at last. But there was a stillness to her, an ageless quality to her eyes that betrayed the truth. "What do you want?" Eduardo asked, his voice rough with emotion. Sophia's perfect composure cracked slightly, a flicker of what might have been genuine emotion crossing her face. "To warn you," she said softly, "Blackwood knows what you're planning. The curandera told someone who works for him about your visit, about the binding ritual." Maria stepped forward, still holding Isabella. "How do we know this isn't a trap? That you aren't here to gain our trust, to get inside our home?" Pain flashed across Sophia's features. "I can't prove my intentions, Mama. I know what I've become. I know what I did at the church." Her gaze dropped to Isabella. "But Ramona, what happened to her? I can't let it happen again." "What did happen to Ramona?" Consuela demanded, moving to stand beside her father. Sophia's face contorted with grief that looked startlingly genuine. "The transformation failed. Her body rejected it. She suffered, Consuela, terribly, and then—" She swallowed hard. "Blackwood has no use for failures." "You helped him," Eduardo said, his voice cold. "You helped him try to take Isabella." "I had no choice," Sophia cried, sudden passion breaking through her composed exterior. "His blood is in me now. His will. It's like a physical force. Fighting it is like trying to stop your heart from beating." She took a deep, unnecessary breath. "But seeing you all again, seeing Isabella—" Something broke through. Some part of me remembered what it was to be Sophia Lopez, not just Blackwood's creation. Maria studied her daughter's face, searching for deception. If what you say is true, if you truly want to help us, then tell us how to defeat him. Sophia shook her head, glancing nervously at the darkening sky. Not defeat. You can't defeat him. He's too powerful, too old. But you can escape him. We won't run, Eduardo declared firmly. This is our home. Then you'll die here, Sophia replied bluntly. All of you. Blackwood will take Isabella and any of you girls he thinks worthy of transformation. The rest he'll kill slowly, painfully, feeding on your fear as much as your blood. Teresa gasped, and Mariana began to cry quietly. Maria hushed them, never taking her eyes off Sophia. The binding ritual, Maria pressed. Will it work? Sophia hesitated. Perhaps, for a time, but the curandera didn't tell you the cost, did she? For a binding that strong, blood must be sacrificed. The blood of someone connected to him. Your blood, Eduardo realized. Sophia nodded. My blood freely given, and the binding might hold him. For years, maybe decades. Long enough for you to take Isabella far away, to let her grow up somewhere he can't find her. And you, Maria asked, her voice breaking, what happens to you if you betray him this way? Sophia's smile was heartbreaking in its gentleness. I'm already dead, Mama. The Sophia you knew died the night Blackwood took me. What's left is something else. Something that remembers being your daughter but isn't, not really. I don't believe that, Maria said fiercely. You're here, warning us. That's my Sophia, brave, protective of her family. Doubt flickered in Sophia's eyes, quickly replaced by resolve. I have to go. Blackwood will notice my absence soon. The new moon is in 3 nights. If you still want to attempt the binding, I'll come to the church at midnight. Bring the soil, bring silver, bring everything the curandera gave you. She began backing away. And Mama, if I try to harm any of you, if I turn on you, don't hesitate. Use the silver. End it. Before anyone could respond, Sophia turned and disappeared into the gathering darkness with inhuman speed, leaving the Lopez family staring after her in stunned silence. Can we trust her? Lucia finally asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Eduardo closed and barred the door, his movements heavy with the weight of decision. I don't know, he admitted, but I think we must try. It may be our only chance. Maria looked down at Isabella, at the dark mark on her tiny neck. 3 nights, she murmured. 3 nights to prepare. The new moon night arrived, bringing with it a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the stars themselves. The Lopez family made their way to the mission church just before midnight, moving in tense silence through the deserted streets of Tucson. Eduardo led the way, revolver in hand, with Lucia beside him carrying a lantern. Maria followed with Isabella, while Consuela, Teresa, and Mariana brought up the rear, each armed with silver items blessed by both Father Dominguez and Doña Elvira. The church stood dark and silent, its windows like blind eyes staring out into the night. No priest waited to greet them. Father Dominguez had reluctantly provided the key to Eduardo, but had refused to participate in what he called pagan rituals, despite his own fear of Blackwood. "Stay close," Eduardo whispered as he unlocked the heavy wooden door. Once inside, Lucia and Teresa will prepare the altar as Doña Elvira instructed. Consuela and Mariana will secure the doors and windows with salt and silver. Maria and I will watch for Sophia. The interior of the church was cold, far colder than the mild Arizona night outside. Their breath clouded in the air as they moved inside, the lantern light creating grotesque shadows that danced across the whitewashed walls. The baptismal font had been cleaned and refilled with holy water, which now reflected the lantern's glow like a pool of liquid silver. "She's not here," Consuela whispered, glancing around the empty church. "She'll come," Maria said with a certainty she didn't entirely feel. She gave her word. They set about their preparations with the efficiency of those who know time works against them. Lucia and Teresa arranged silver crosses, blessed candles, and bundles of herbs on the altar, while Consuela and Mariana poured lines of salt across thresholds and windowsills. Maria placed Isabella, sleeping soundly for once, in a small cradle near the altar, surrounding it with a circle of silver coins. Eduardo withdrew the ornate box containing the soil from Blackwood's homeland from his coat pocket, handling it carefully, as Doña Elvira had warned. The binding ritual would require precise timing and unwavering resolve. As the church clock began to strike midnight, a soft knock sounded at the door. Eduardo nodded to Maria, who moved to open it, silver cross held before her like a shield. Sophia stood outside, even paler than before, her dark eyes huge in her white face. She wore a simple dress rather than the elegant attire she'd had at Blackwood Manor, and her hair hung loose around her shoulders as it had when she was truly part of the family. "You came," Maria breathed, relief evident in her voice. Sophia nodded, not moving to enter. "I can't cross the threshold without invitation," she explained, confirming one of the old tales about her kind. "Even though it was once my church, too." "Sofia Lopez," Eduardo said formally, stepping forward, "we invite you to enter this house of God for the purpose of binding the one who took you from us." A visible shudder passed through Sophia's body. "I accept your invitation," she replied, her voice equally formal. As she stepped across the threshold, the candles on the altar flickered wildly, though there was no breeze. Sophia's gaze moved immediately to the cradle where Isabella slept. "The mark," she said, moving closer despite the girl's nervous reactions. "It's faded. The curandera's ointment worked better than I expected." "Not well enough," Maria replied. "We can still feel him searching for her every night. His influence grows stronger as she grows weaker." Sophia nodded grimly. "Then we have no time to waste. The binding must be completed before he realizes what we're doing." She looked around at the preparations. "You have everything?" Eduardo held up the silver box, soil from his homeland, as the curandera instructed. "And silver for my blood," Sophia added, producing a small knife with a silver blade. "My contribution to the binding." The family gathered around the altar, forming a circle with Sophia at its center. The ritual Doña Elvira had taught them was simple in its components, but complex in its meaning. A blend of Catholic prayer and much older traditions that predated the arrival of Europeans in the Americas. Sophia knelt before the altar, head bowed. "Begin," she instructed. Eduardo opened the silver box, revealing a small quantity of dark earth. "With this soil from the land of his birth, we bind Sebastian Blackwood to his origins," he recited. "With these herbs of protection, we shield ourselves from his influence," Maria continued, placing Doña Elvira's pouches around the circle. "With this holy water, we cleanse the connection between hunter and prey," Lucia said, sprinkling drops from the font onto the soil. "With this silver, we weaken his power in our presence," Teresa added, placing silver coins alongside the soil. "With these prayers, we call upon higher powers to witness our intent." Consuela and Mariana spoke together, their young voices steady despite their fear. Sophia raised the silver knife, "And with my blood of his making, I sever his claim upon this family." Before she could bring the blade to her wrist, a cold laugh echoed through the church. "How touching," said a familiar cultured voice. "A family united in foolish defiance." Sebastian Blackwood stood in the doorway, elegant as always in his black suit. Behind him, shadowy figures moved in the darkness outside. His collection, the pale ones who had appeared in the church on the night of Isabella's baptism. "Sophia," Blackwood said, his voice like silk over steel. "Come here." Sophia's face contorted with effort as she visibly fought his command. "No," she managed through gritted teeth. "I won't." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "You disappoint me, child. After all I've given you, immortality, power, freedom from human weakness, you would betray me for these mortals, these cattle." "They're my family," Sophia gasped, still fighting his influence. "Something you wouldn't understand." Eduardo raised his revolver, aiming it at Blackwood's heart. "You can't enter without invitation," he stated, praying it was true. Blackwood smiled, the expression chilling in its confidence. "Normally, yes, that's the rule. But your lovely Sophia has created a bridge for me with her presence. Blood calls to blood, especially blood of my making." He took a step forward, crossing the threshold without difficulty. "And besides, this is hardly consecrated ground anymore. Not after what transpired here on the night of your youngest daughter's baptism." Maria moved to stand protectively in front of Isabella's cradle. "You won't take another child from us." "I'm not here for the infant," Blackwood replied, surprising them all. "Not tonight. Tonight I'm here for the traitor." His gaze fixed on Sophia with terrible intensity. "You know the punishment for betrayal, my dear?" Sophia screamed, a sound of pure agony, as she collapsed to the floor. Her body convulsed, back arching unnaturally as blood began to seep from her eyes, her nose, her mouth, as if Blackwood were tearing her apart from the inside. Eduardo fired his revolver, the silver bullet striking Blackwood squarely in the chest. The impact staggered him, interrupting his focus on Sophia, who lay gasping on the church floor. "Silver?" Blackwood observed, looking down at the wound with mild interest. "Painful, but hardly fatal to one of my age." The wound was already closing, though the flesh around it had turned black and necrotic. "You'll need to do better than that, Saddlemaker." The shadowy figures from outside had begun to press against the invisible barrier of the threshold, unable to enter without invitation, but creating a blockade against escape. The Lopez family was trapped inside with Blackwood. "The ritual," Sophia gasped, struggling to her knees. Blood still trickled from her nose and mouth, staining her pale dress crimson. "Finish it, now!" Eduardo fired again, buying them seconds, as Blackwood staggered from another silver bullet. Maria snatched up the knife Sophia had dropped, slicing her own palm open and letting her blood drip onto the soil in the silver box. "Mother's blood," she improvised desperately, to protect her children from harm. Consuela followed suit, then Lucia, then Teresa and Mariana, each adding their blood to the mixture, while Eduardo continued to fire at Blackwood, slowing but not stopping his advance. Sophia crawled to the altar, leaving a trail of blood in her wake. With a tremendous effort, she pulled herself up and plunged her hand into the bloodied soil. "Blood of your making," she cried, her voice stronger now. "Return to the earth that bore you. By this blood and soil, I bind you, Sebastian Blackwood." A howl of rage erupted from Blackwood as a visible shockwave emanated from the silver box, knocking everyone off their feet. The church windows shattered inward, showering glass across the floor. The candles on the altar flared like torches, then extinguished completely, plunging the church into darkness, save for the faint glow emanating from the silver box. In that ghostly light, Blackwood's face was transformed into something inhuman. Skin stretched tight over an ancient skull, eyes burning with hate and hunger. He lunged for Sophia, fingers curved into claws. "If I am bound, you're bound with me," he snarled, seizing her by the throat. "Your existence is tied to mine, child of my blood." Sophia didn't struggle against his grip. Instead, she smiled through bloodied lips. "I know," she said simply. "That's the final part of the binding." Before anyone could react, she drove the silver knife into her own heart. Blackwood's scream was inhuman, a sound of rage and pain so intense it seemed to shake the very foundations of the church. His body began to wither before their eyes, skin shrinking against bone, hair falling away in clumps, eyes sinking into their sockets. Sophia collapsed into her mother's arms, the silver knife protruding from her chest. "It's done," she whispered. "He's bound to me, and I to death. He can't harm any of you now." "Sophia, no," Maria sobbed, cradling her daughter. "There must be another way." "There isn't." Sophia's voice was fading, her unnatural beauty reverting to something more human as death approached. "This was my choice, Mama, my atonement." Eduardo knelt beside them, his face wet with tears. "You were never to blame, Mejia. You were a victim as much as Ramona." Sophia smiled faintly. "Ramona is waiting for me. I can feel her." Her eyes, now fully human again, sought out each of her sisters' faces. "Live well, live fully, and remember, some prosperity comes at too high a price." With those words, Sophia Lopez died for the second and final time, truly at peace at last. On the church floor, what remained of Sebastian Blackwood had crumbled to dust, indistinguishable from the soil that had bound him. Outside, his followers had vanished like mist before the dawn, their connection to their master severed permanently. Spring, 1918. Isabella Lopez, now a young woman of 17, placed wildflowers on her sister Sophia's grave. The small cemetery behind the mission church was peaceful in the early morning light, birds singing in the mesquite trees that provided dappled shade. "I brought your favorites," Isabella said softly, arranging white lilies among the colorful wildflowers. "Mama says they always reminded her of your baptism day." Udi, though Sophia had died long before Isabella could form any memories of her, the tradition of visiting her grave on the anniversary of her sacrifice had been maintained faithfully through the years. Today marked 17 years since the night in the church when Sophia had given her life to bind Sebastian Blackwood and free her family from his shadow. Tucson had grown considerably in those years, transforming from a dusty frontier town into a small but prosperous city. The Lopez family had grown with it, their saddle-making business expanding into a successful leather goods store that now employed several workers. Eduardo's hair had turned silver, but his hands remained steady at his craft. Maria had opened a small restaurant adjacent to the store, serving traditional Mexican dishes that had become popular with both Hispanic and Anglo customers. Consuela had married Pablo Mendez, one of the men who had stood guard outside the church on the night of Isabella's baptism. They had 4 children of their own now. Lucia had become a teacher at the school for Mexican children. Teresa had moved to Phoenix with her husband, a young doctor. Mariana helped run the restaurant with Maria. None of them ever spoke of Blackwood or the events of 1901 outside the family, but none of them had forgotten. As for Isabella, she had grown up hearing the carefully edited story of her oldest sisters, Sophia and Ramona, who had died of a mysterious illness that had spared the rest of the family. It wasn't until her 15th birthday that Eduardo and Maria had finally told her the full truth about her baptism night, about Blackwood, and about Sophia's sacrifice. The crescent-shaped mark on Isabella's neck had faded to a barely visible scar over the years. Sometimes, usually around the new moon, it would itch or burn slightly, but whatever connection it had once created had been severed with Blackwood's destruction. "Miss Lopez?" Isabella turned to find Sheriff Thomas Davis standing respectfully at a distance. The son of the former sheriff, he had followed in his father's footsteps after the elder Davis's death 5 years earlier. "Sheriff Davis," she acknowledged with a nod. "What brings you here so early?" Davis removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "I'm sorry to disturb your visit, but your father asked me to find you. There's been a development he thinks you should know about." Isabella frowned. "What kind of development?" "Blackwood Manor is being demolished today," Davis explained. "The city finally seized the property for back taxes after it sat abandoned all these years. They're clearing the land for a new school building." "I see," Isabella said slowly. "And why does my father think this concerns me?" Davis shifted uncomfortably. "The demolition crew found something when they began clearing out the basement, old trunks, locked and sealed. When they opened them," he hesitated, "there were remains inside, human remains." A chill ran down Isabella's spine despite the warm spring morning. "How many?" 17 so far, mostly young women and girls. They think there may be more in the deeper levels of the basement." Davis's face was grim. "Your father thought you should know because, well, given what happened to your sisters." Isabella nodded, understanding. The official record had never connected Sophia and Ramona's disappearances to Sebastian Blackwood. Now, perhaps, some form of justice might finally be possible, even if the true nature of Blackwood's evil would remain known only to the Lopez family. "Thank you for telling me, Sheriff," she said. "Please let my father know I'll be home shortly." Davis nodded, replaced his hat, and walked back toward the church, leaving Isabella alone with her thoughts and Sophia's flowers. "Did you hear that, Sophia?" she murmured to the grave. "They're finding his victims. The world will know something of what he did, even if they never know the whole truth." She touched the faint scar on her neck. "Your sacrifice wasn't in vain. Our family has thrived. I've grown up safe, loved, free from his shadow." A gentle breeze stirred the flowers on the grave, carrying the sweet scent of lilies. For a moment, Isabella could almost imagine it was Sophia's reply, her blessing from whatever peaceful place she now resided. As Isabella walked home through the streets of Tucson, she noted how the town had changed, modernized. Automobiles now competed with horses for space on the widened roads. Electric lights had replaced gas lamps. The old superstitions and fears that had once gripped the Mexican community had largely faded as education and opportunity increased, but not entirely. As she passed the site where Blackwood Manor stood, or rather was in the process of being demolished, Isabella noticed how even the Anglo workers crossed themselves when carrying items from the house, how they whispered among themselves, glancing nervously at the darkened windows and shadowed doorways, how none of them would enter the basement alone, even in broad daylight. Some evils left impressions that survived even their destruction. Some stories refused to die, persisting in whispers and cautionary tales. "Miss Lopez," one of the workers, a young man Isabella recognized from church, called out to her. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." "I'm just passing by, Miguel," she assured him, "on my way home." Miguel glanced back at the half-demolished manor, lowering his voice. "They say some of the remains they found, they're very old, decades old, and others," he swallowed hard, "others look more recent." Isabella felt her blood run cold. "How recent?" "The doctor couldn't say for certain, but after your family's encounter with Blackwood, after he disappeared." Miguel shifted uncomfortably. "There were still people who went missing in Tucson over the years, mostly drifters, people passing through, no one who'd be missed right away." A heavy stone of dread settled in Isabella's stomach. "Are you suggesting Blackwood was still active? Still taking victims after 1901? Miguel shook his head quickly. No. Blackwood himself vanished that night, just as your family reported. But the foreman found something else in the basement yesterday." He glanced around, then beckoned Isabella closer. "A journal, written by someone named Sophia." Isabella's heart nearly stopped. "Sophia? My sister Sophia?" "I don't know if it was your sister," Miguel admitted, "but the journal spoke of others like Blackwood, others he had created, who continued his work after he was gone." Before Isabella could respond, a sharp voice cut through their conversation. "Martinez, back to work. This isn't social hour." Miguel jumped guiltily. "I have to go, but Miss Lopez, be careful. Some of the men think the evil in that house hasn't fully died yet." As Miguel hurried back to his crew, Isabella stood frozen, staring at the crumbling facade of Blackwood Manor. Others like him. Others he had created. Had Sophia known? Had her sacrifice bound Blackwood himself, but failed to eliminate all of his dark legacy? The Lopez home was unusually quiet when Isabella finally arrived. The family store was closed despite it being a business day, the "Closed for Family Matter" sign hanging in the window. She found her parents and sisters gathered in the kitchen, their faces grave. "The sheriff found you," Eduardo stated rather than asked, his once strong voice now raspier with age. Isabella nodded, taking a seat at the table. "He told me about the remains at Blackwood Manor, and I heard something else from one of the workers, about a journal, supposedly written by Sophia." Maria gasped softly, her hand flying to her throat. Sophia's journal. She kept one as a girl, but I assumed it was lost when she was taken. According to Miguel Martinez, this journal was written after she was taken, Isabella explained. It spoke of others like Blackwood, others he had transformed who continued his work after he was gone. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Finally, Consuela spoke, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. We thought it was over. All these years, we thought Sophia's sacrifice had ended it. It did end Blackwood, Eduardo said firmly. Whatever this journal contains, whatever others may exist, Blackwood himself was destroyed that night. I saw him turn to dust with my own eyes. But if he created others, Lucia began, then they are not our concern, Eduardo interrupted. Our family has paid enough. Sophia paid enough. Whatever evil remains in the world, it is for others to fight now. Mariana, always the most sensitive of the sisters, looked at Isabella with worry in her eyes. The mark, she said softly. Has it been bothering you lately? Isabella's hand went instinctively to the faint scar on her neck. No more than usual. It itches sometimes around the new moon, but there's been no pain, no dreams. She hesitated, then added, at least no unusual dreams. What do you mean, unusual? Maria asked sharply. Isabella shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable under her family's intense scrutiny. Just sometimes I dream of places I've never been, a city with tall buildings and electric lights everywhere. Streets full of automobiles, people in strange clothes. She smiled weakly. The future, perhaps. Nothing sinister. The tension in her mother's face eased slightly. Dreams are just dreams most of the time. Most of the time, Eduardo agreed, though his expression remained troubled. But given what we now know, given this journal, he took a deep breath. Perhaps it would be best if you went to stay with Teresa in Phoenix for a while, Isabella, just until the demolition is complete and things settle down. Isabella stiffened. Leave Tucson? Leave my home, my work, my friends, because of some old bones and a journal that may not even have been written by Sophia. Your safety has always been our priority, Maria said gently. From the moment you were born, from the night of your baptism. And I have been safe, Isabella insisted. For 17 years, I've been safe. The mark has faded. Blackwood is gone. Why should I run now? Before her parents could respond, a knock sounded at the front door. Eduardo frowned. Visitors would normally use the store entrance, not the private family door. I'll see who it is, Consuela offered, rising from the table. They heard the front door open, followed by Consuela's surprised voice. Father Reyes. This is unexpected. Father Antonio Reyes, who had replaced the long-retired Father Dominguez at the mission church 10 years earlier, entered the kitchen with an apologetic smile. Forgive the intrusion, Lopez family. But this matter could not wait. Eduardo stood to greet the priest. What matter, Father? Father Reyes reached into his satchel and withdrew a small leather-bound book, old and worn, its pages yellowed with age. The sheriff brought this to me an hour ago, found among the items removed from Blackwood Manor. When I saw the name inscribed inside, I knew it should come to you first. He placed the book on the kitchen table. On its cover, in faded but elegant script, was written, The Journal of Sophia Lopez, 1901-1905. Maria's hand trembled as she reached for the journal. Sophia lived until 1905, but she died in the church, in my arms. Father Reyes's expression was sympathetic but firm. I believe this journal may contain answers to questions you've carried for many years, but I must warn you, what I glimpsed inside is disturbing. Perhaps it would be best read privately, as a family. Eduardo nodded gravely. Thank you for bringing this to us, Father. After the priest had gone, the family gathered around the journal, none willing to be the first to open it. Finally, Maria took it with determined hands. Sophia was my daughter, she said quietly. Whatever she became, whatever she wrote, I need to know. The first entry was dated March 15th, 1901, 2 weeks after Sophia's disappearance from the Lopez home. The handwriting was clearly Sophia's, though more elegant than the childish script she had used before. Blackwood says I must record my transformation, that the process is different for each of his children. The pain is beyond description. My human life feels like a distant dream already, though I still remember Mama's face, Papa's voice. Blackwood promises these memories will fade with time, that it is easier this way. I am not sure I want them to fade. They are all I have left of warmth. Maria's voice broke as she read, but she continued determinedly through entries that documented Sophia's gradual transformation into something inhuman. The journal detailed her first feeding, her growing powers, and Blackwood's meticulous training of his new creation. Then came the entries about Ramona. Blackwood has taken Ramona. He says 2 daughters from the same bloodline will strengthen his collection exponentially. I tried to warn her, to reach her in dreams as he taught me, but she did not understand. Now she suffers as I suffered, but something is wrong. Her body fights the transformation more than mine did. Blackwood is concerned. The next entry, dated a month later, was stained with what looked horribly like dried blood. Ramona is gone. The transformation failed completely. Blackwood says some bloodlines contain resistances, unpredictable factors. He disposed of her remains in the deep basement with his other failures. I wept for the first time since my own transformation, and Blackwood punished me severely for this human weakness. He says I must learn detachment if I am to be useful in his plans. Isabella watched tears stream down her mother's face as she read, her own eyes burning. This was the sister she had never known, writing of horrors she could barely comprehend. The journal continued, describing Blackwood's collection of transformed humans from various bloodlines. Sophia wrote of their abilities, their weaknesses, and most disturbingly, their missions to locate and mark other potential candidates across the territories. Then came the entry dated the night of Isabella's baptism. Tonight, we take the youngest Lopez daughter. Blackwood says she has the strongest potential of all, that her blood will complete what he calls the Western collection. I must play my part, must appear loyal, though my heart, if I still possess such a thing, rebels against taking another sister. Perhaps this wrongness I feel is why Blackwood now trusts the newer ones more than me. Elena from San Francisco, Thomas from Denver. They have no memories of their human lives to trouble them. They obey without question. The final entries described the confrontation at the church, but from a perspective none of them had considered. Sophia's own desperate gamble. The binding ritual will not destroy Blackwood, merely contain him. But in binding him to me, and binding myself to death, I create a chain that should hold him indefinitely. My siblings will be safe, from him at least, but not from the others. Elena, Thomas, and the newer ones will continue his work. They fear what has happened to their master, but believe his instructions are still to be followed. I have left warnings where I hope they will one day be found. The Lopez bloodline must remain vigilant. The mark on Isabella will protect her from the others as long as Blackwood remains bound. But when she comes of age, they may sense her potential again. I have done what I can. May God, if he still listens to one such as me, protect my family when I no longer can. The final entry, dated March 1905, was brief and chilling. They have found me. Blackwood's binding holds, but his children seek vengeance. I will hide this journal where only the right eyes will find it when the time comes. Isabella, if you are reading this, run. Tucson, May 1918. The demolition of Blackwood Manor was complete, the land cleared for the new school construction. The bodies found in the basement had been given proper burials, though most remained unidentified. Sheriff Davis had conducted a thorough investigation, concluding that Sebastian Blackwood had been a serial killer who had preyed on vulnerable young women for decades before his disappearance in 1901. Only the Lopez family knew the full truth. Sophia's journal had been read, discussed, and ultimately hidden away in a silver box similar to the one that had contained the soil used in the binding ritual. Eduardo had inscribed protective symbols on the box, and Maria had added a lock of Isabella's hair, a connection to the bloodline Blackwood had coveted. Despite her parents' concerns, Isabella had refused to leave Tucson. "If what Sophia wrote is true," she had argued, "these others could find me anywhere. At least here we know what we're facing. We have Sophia's warnings to guide us." Reluctantly, her family had agreed, though with conditions. Isabella was never to go out alone after dark. The protective rituals Doña Elvira had taught them were to be maintained rigorously. And most importantly, Isabella was to wear a silver pendant containing a tiny portion of the soil from Blackwood's homeland, a reminder of the binding that still held him, a warning to any who might sense her potential. Life had settled into a watchful routine. By day, Tucson was a growing, modernizing city where the Lopez family continued to prosper. By night, it remained a place of shadows and whispers, where some doors were kept firmly locked and some names were never spoken aloud. Isabella stood at her bedroom window, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The silver pendant hung cool against her skin, a constant presence she had grown accustomed to. Her fingers absently traced the crescent scar on her neck, faded but never completely gone. On her dresser lay an open letter from the University of Arizona, offering her admission for the fall semester. Education for a young Mexican-American woman was still uncommon, but the Lopez family's standing in the community and Isabella's exceptional academic record had opened doors that would have been closed to her mother's generation. A choice lay before her: accept the university's offer and step into a future bright with possibility, or heed Sophia's final warning and run from the legacy that had shadowed her family for 17 years. In the distance, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Isabella touched the silver pendant once more, drawing strength from what it represented, not just protection, but Sophia's sacrifice, her family's resilience, their refusal to be defined by fear. "They took enough from us," she whispered to the night. "They don't get to take my future too." And as if in response, a cool breeze stirred the curtains, carrying the faint scent of lilies, Sophia's favorite flowers. Isabella smiled, a decision crystallizing in her mind. She would accept the university's offer. She would step into the future with caution, but not fear, vigilance, but not paranoia. And if Blackwood's children still lurked in the shadows, if they sensed her potential and came for her as Sophia had warned, well, the Lopez family had faced such evil before and survived. The dark Godfather who had claimed her sisters had underestimated the power of family, of love, of a bloodline that refused to be collected. Isabella closed her window against the night and turned toward the warm light of her home, where her family waited. Whatever darkness the future held, she would not face it alone. In the years to come, whispers would persist in Tucson, stories of pale figures glimpsed at dusk, of strangers with too bright eyes asking questions about local families, of the ruins of Blackwood Manor where nothing would grow despite the fertile desert soil. But these remained just whispers, ghost stories told to frightened children. The real horror, the truth about Sebastian Blackwood and his collection, faded into history, preserved only in Sophia's journal and in the vigilance of a family that had learned the true cost of prosperity. Every baptism night, the Lopez family stood guard. Every new moon, they renewed their protections. And on each anniversary of Sophia's sacrifice, they placed white lilies on her grave, honoring the daughter who had given everything to break the dark Godfather's claim on her family's future. The mark on Isabella's neck never fully disappeared, a reminder that some connections once formed could never be completely severed. But neither could it dictate her path forward. That choice, to live boldly despite the shadows, to build a life that honored rather than feared the past, was hers alone to make. And in making it, she claimed a victory that Sebastian Blackwood, with all his power and hunger, could never understand. The triumph of a mortal life fully lived over an immortal existence, empty of love.